Street racing is something that happens because it's an alternative, because going racing gets too expensive. Nobody really cares about getting people off the street. They care about making $1.
Many years ago, in the land of the free, a group of guys with time on their hand and modified cars started street racing. The nice people of suburbia, scared by the noise and the speed, complained about street racing. So the street racers built a track. People started building houses around the track and eventually complained about the noise from the track. The track closed. Street racers went back to the streets. And people started complaining about street racers. Again.
And that's how it all got fucked up.
Edward, I told you, we want to try to keep it PG.
And that's how it all got messed up?
That's better. But yeah, it went exactly like that. Good morning, and welcome to episode 2 of Chases a Race, the podcast. After we explored the meaning of the title of said podcast and introduced ourselves, that's me, Tiziano, and
Edward,
we are going to give you a bit of background on street racing, how it all started and how it developed over the years in the Los Angeles area. We are going to tap into NHRA, the National Hot Rod Association. This podcast is loosely based on Chases a Race, the documentary that was never made, but that I have filmed and researched. For 4 years, I suffered from my art. Now, it's your turn. So, Edward, what do you know about the history of street racing?
The history of street racing? I don't know much, to be honest. I only know as far back as when I started coming out, and that wasn't too long ago, so... And I'm pretty sure there's a lot more racing before I came out, so pretty sure there's a lot of history there, just I don't know much of it.
There's something fascinating about human race, and it's the need to document, to create a pattern, to establish who came before. That's how laws are written, and that's how we learn to discern right from wrong, by what is accepted in society. So, there is a difference between history and prehistory. Prehistory generally refers to the time before writing was invented and practiced, while history typically refers to the time period after which written records still exist. However, there is no clear dividing line between the two periods. They overlap for a while. And I feel that's the same with a sport governing body. It writes the record and establishes respect based on merit, while on the streets, you live the moment. There is no before, and the after is far away. What counts is the now.
Yeah, that makes sense. As far as street racing, yeah, it's always the cars that are out right now that everyone really focuses on. But from time to time, cars do break and disappear for a few months or sometimes years, but the ones that are in the spotlight are the ones that are currently running. And then there's always, fast races that happen, fast racers, but it's constantly a cycle of people coming in and out, mainly cars being down or being built.
And yet, despite these prehistorical settings, you felt the need to record the races. Why did you do that?
I started posting them on Instagram on my old page. That was 818_1320. And I was doing that for a few years, and that page got shut down towards the end of 2019. But I started in 2012, so it was like 7 years of a lot of memories that got deleted with it. And once that page got shut down, I started focusing mainly on YouTube, and I made the YouTube channel Valley Racing, and that's what I've been focusing more on now recently.
What I found interesting is that street racing is somewhat an obscure phenomenon, and yet very much glamorized by Hollywood. Over the years, there have been countless movies where street racing as a youth phenomenon was at the center of a plot. 2-Lane, Blacktop, Rebel Without a Cause, Grease, American Graffiti, Back to the Future, and of course, The Fast and the Furious, the first one. And yet, there is nothing mainstream out there. Nobody knows really what it is. And I guess we both did the same job with a different goal. We wanted to cater different audiences. I guess you won because you are very popular, while my documentary is still in the editing limbo. But hopefully, this podcast will bridge that gap. I remain convinced, for example, that season I filmed would never come back. The San Fernando Valley was open for business, and with the closure of Canoga Speedway, that part is gone. There are no more races in the valley. And yet it will live forever in my footage and on some of the people's Instagram pages.
So before I would post on Instagram, but Instagram limited to a minute. So I would edit the videos and try to, just try to show the burnout, the race, and everything under a minute. And it really sucked because I was sitting here recording, an hour, maybe 2 hours worth of footage. And to trim all that down to a minute really sucked.
What do you show on Valley Racing?
At first, it was mainly the stuff that happened in the valley, the money races in the valley, but then Canoga Speedway got shut down, so now it's pretty much everything in SoCal that at least I go to. So it's either LA, Compton, Diamond Bar, Palmdale, like just everything around the valley where I may get invited to.
As a journalist, I kind of seen a phenomenon that was repeating as a rippling effect. Like there's always going to be a Valley Private out there organizing or repping a team. There's always going to be fast cars, and there's always going to be a problem with be it illegal. There's always going to be different proposals to find a solution, and in the end, nothing happens. How do you see it evolved in the last 2-3 years?
The cars have gotten faster. That's one thing. Something from 4 years ago to now, like the cars are coming out a lot faster. So before, like in the valley, before they shut Canoga down, we had a couple other streets that were shitty streets that didn't really work for fast cars, but they were there for slow cars. But now that these cars are coming out faster, like those streets, even if we wanted to, we can't really use.
The clip for today is going to be about the history of street racing, and he has as a main speaker Stan Goldstein, who is the honorary vice president of the International Brotherhood of Street Racers. Stan, the man, was affiliated with Big Willie, and we will touch on who Big Willie was, but I feel it deserves a chapter apart. Today's episode is on NHRA, and Edward is going to provide a commentary.
So the video starts off with Stan Goldstein talking.
What would you like to see first? What kind of story are we telling here?
It wasn't a total endorsement of being a lawbreaker or an outlaw. That was a component of what had to happen because that's the way the culture rolled. And that's the way the culture still rolls.
It's showing some footage of some cars racing on like what he's describing as a dry lake.
Wally Parks and Bob Peterson and just so many of the names that you see in hot rodding today ran the dry lakes. As that became more popular, the activities on the streets also became more popular. You had fellas returning from the various military conflicts, and they would come back and they were restless and they had money and they would strip down a car and they would go racing.
It's showing videos of soldiers coming home from World War II. Now it's showing some cars lining up, racing. Footage seems to be from the 50s.
The first recognized drag strip in Southern California was Santa Ana drag strip, and that was at the Santa Ana airport. And a fellow named J.C. Hart was the manager, and he was from the South, and he arbitrarily established the distance at a quarter of a mile because that's the distance quarter horses ran when he grew up. J.C. was probably considered the father of modern drag racing. He teamed up with a fellow named Wally Parks. Wally Parks was the National Hot Rod Association.
Now it's showing video clips from what he said is from the Santa Ana racetrack that was at the Santa Ana airport. And there's a lot of cars lining up. Looks like a bunch of 1950s cars. And now there's a picture of a guy. It says his name is Wally Parks. It says he's the founder of the NHRA.
There's limits, there's rules, there's this, there's that. Street racing, there's no rules.
Now it shows Fabian sitting in a car in a garage. It says his name is Fabian Arroyo from the Brotherhood of Street Racers.
You show up with what you got and you go race the other guy with what he's got. And half the time you're hustling. There's a lot of hustling going on. Sometimes there's no hustle. It's an all-out race.
Yeah, but it's very important to make the distinction that not all drag racers are street racers, but all street racers are drag racers.
There's footage of a street race. Looks like a black Trans Am and a silver Chrysler 300. Looks like Gardena in Maine.
Racing has more to do with people than it has to do with cars. You have the Olympics. What's the purpose of the Olympics? It's competitiveness. Street racing is something that happens because it's an alternative because going racing gets too expensive. Nobody really cares about getting people off the street. They care about making a dollar. And that's the biggest problem you have with what's going on today.
When he mentioned how they chose the distance of a quarter mile, like I'd never heard that before. So that was pretty interesting. I actually wondered it a few years back, but never chose to look for an answer or anything. So you found that answer for me. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. The Brotherhood of Street Racers is an organization still existing today. Stan the Man and Fabian belongs to it. But we will get them an episode entirely dedicated to them and Terminal Island, which was the only legal alternative to NHRA events for a few decades.
Early part of the 20th century, there weren't a lot of roads. And if there were roads, they were often bumpy dirt roads. So a way to find that out was to find a smooth racing surface. And obviously lake beds, dry lake beds were some of the best ways to do this.
Here's Terry Blount, who at the time of the interview was the Vice President Public Relations and Communication for NHRA.
The Bonneville Salt Flats started, if I'm not mistaken, they started actually racing cars out there and timing cars out there in like 1914. So this has been going on a long time, and at that time it was a necessity. You really didn't have other good options. Obviously that's not true anymore, but at the time it was, and it's stayed true all these years. It's still the only place you can go and test cars the way they test them today at 500 and 600 miles an hour because of how big it is, how flat it is, how smooth it is, and it's become a huge American tradition, really.
It's true. You can just show up with your car and just run the hell out of it. Have you ever been to the Bonneville Salt Flats?
No, I don't know where the fuck that's at. I don't even know where the hell that's at.
It's between Utah and Nevada. There's actually a nice casino.
Oh, well then, I might check it out.
There you go. I filmed there a little documentary, and it's one of those things, Speed Week that is, that unless you're involved in prepping the vehicle or running it, it's just kind of boring and definitely uncomfortable because it's hot as hell and the salt literally blinds you, and all you see is a dot in the horizon getting blurrier and blurrier due to the heat waves. Anyway.
Well, it became, obviously, especially in the late 40s, street racing became a serious problem in Southern California. There was, Southern California was a wide open area at that time, and there was a lot of places where young drivers wanted to test the limits, and it was becoming a big problem. And frankly, it's still a problem today, but in that area, it was a major problem. And so there grew a need, and Wally Parks saw a need to find a way to give them another option, to do it in a actual sports competition, sanctioned environment, controlled environment, to do it where they could do it without risk to themselves, and do it in a legal fashion. All these things were part of his reason to found the NHRA, and part of the reason that it grew so quickly, because there was more and more people trying to take their car to the limits. And this wasn't just true in Southern California, but this is where it started, and it was probably where it was the most pronounced. And a way to get them off the streets and do it in an environment where they could still test the limits of their car, but to do so in a legal fashion and to do so in a controlled environment against other people. And it was all about competition, really.
So before we continue with the video, let's give a bit of a context to what the NHRA is.
Tiziano wants me to read this part.
Tiziano is also going to edit this video, so I can take this. So Tiziano made me do it out of it.
I'm going to say it after each word. The Tiziano made me read this. Association. Tiziano made me read this. Was. All right, let's see. All right, Tiziano made me read this, but hey, I'm going to read it anyways. The association was founded by Wally Parks in 1951 in California to provide a governing body to organize and promote the sport of drag racing. Drag racing is a type of motor racing in which automobiles or motorcycles, usually... Wait. Oh, you threw a parentheses in there. Am I reading that or not? What the fuck?
Yeah.
That wasn't there yesterday. Why are you laughing? That was an I. I was like, what the fuck is that? Okay. Drag racing is a type of motor racing in which automobiles or motorcycles, usually specially. Okay. Do I not read the part in parentheses?
I would skip it if I was you.
I was kind of confused. Like, what the fuck are you Why are you crying? It's okay, Tiziano. Okay. Drag racing is a type of motor racing in which automobiles or motorcycles compete, usually two at a time, to be first to cross a set finish line. The race follows a short, straight course from a standing start over a measured distance, most commonly a quarter mile. The NHRA mandates numerous safety devices and procedures in all competition events.
You know, since the beginning, the core principles of the NHRA have not changed, and that is to be able to test cars to the limit in a controlled environment, priority being safety as it always has been, doing it in a legal fashion. And from the very beginning, that's why it started. That's the principles today. It will always be the principles of the NHRA. Of course, now it's grown into a gigantic sanctioning body, the biggest in the world and most successful in the world. But it hasn't changed really, other than the fact that now the rules are much more uniform, where they weren't at the start. There were so many different options for people at different locations that had to be brought in, where everyone would do things in the same way and the same rules. And that is the case today, but it wasn't in the early days. So the core principles really have not changed, and I think that's a big reason for the NHRA's success.
Obviously, NHRA being an organization is big on safety. What's the story on the street?
Rules, as far as in the street, there is no common rules. Rules, people would say there is common rules, but realistically, each race will be negotiated different. So one rule that can be applied to today's race because it was negotiated that way would not apply for tomorrow's race because it might be negotiated differently. And as far as safety only goes as far as the person driving wants to take it. So it's not like the track where, you know, you're required a cage, a helmet, or something to... Things were required for certain times. On the street, you can be the fastest car out there, and if you don't want to wear a helmet, there's no one there to tell you, hey, you have to wear a helmet. You might have a friend that say, hey, you should wear a helmet, but there's no rule saying you have to wear a helmet in order to race. So that's one thing that on the street, there is no one forcing you to follow these rules. It's up to the individual.
And I feel that that's exactly where street racing and drag racing take different roads. The corporate element just detract freedom from the man on the street.
Well, both Parks and Peterson were huge auto lovers, and they are legends today among auto enthusiasts all over the world. And they both loved cars. They loved to see how they could make them cooler, how they could make them go faster. And as part of the hot rod era back in the middle of the 20th century, they were leaders in this field. And they also both wanted to find ways to make people do it in a legal environment and make people do it as safely as possible. But Peterson started Hot Rod magazine, which Wally Parks helped him to do, and Wally Parks became the first editor-in-chief of that magazine, among other magazines that were started by Peterson. Eventually, Wally left because he was so involved in starting the NHRA in the early 1950s when he became president of the NHRA that he founded. He didn't have time to do both anymore, but these two men remained very good friends all their lives.
You know the Peterson Car Museum in LA, in Wilshire and Fairfax, where Biggie Smalls was killed?
No, never been there.
Okay, well, it's a beautiful museum opposite the LACMA. And that Peterson is the Peterson in our story. Inside the museum, there are some of the most beautiful and rare cars in the world. And so, in a way, car culture in LA, mainstream or not, legit or illegal, has its roots in street racing. It's worth noting that the NHRA has been very collaborative. They went from, let's ignore this interview request and it will go away, to, we get what this guy wants to do. The difficult relationship between NHRA and street racing is that the two businesses are pretty linked up. And as much as NHRA doesn't want to talk about it, they have to talk about it. Jessica Hatcher, Senior Director of Public Relations and Communications, linked me up with Jack Beckman, also known as Fast Jack, a valley boy from Granada Hills. Here's Jack.
You know, one of the places to race was San Fernando Road. This is in Southern California, in the San Fernando Valley. It's already a hotbed of hot rodding. And this was a secluded road under a freeway overpass, no street lights there, had a stripe for the starting line, a stripe for the finish line. And I remember the first time my brother took me out there, he had just got his driver's license. I was still 15. And to see cars lining both sides of the road and this nighttime illegal activity, there was a huge air of excitement to that.
Sounds pretty familiar, Edward, huh?
That almost sounds identical to what I said in the first episode. But yeah, I mean, it's that street. I haven't seen no one use it for a while. Oddly enough, this past weekend, someone did try to go there to race. But before that, I haven't seen anyone use it for years. But that was one of the first spots that I went to.
I know many people could argue there's cool things about street racing and there's cool things about organized drag racing. Street racing, that atmosphere is kind of tough to beat. It's nighttime, it's not well lit. There's that air of the police could show up at any time and that excitement. And there's that spontaneity of you could choose off any particular person, make a wager on it, and in 3 minutes find out who has the better car. On the drag strip side of things, it's organized. You can get into the lanes. You can make a certain number of runs per day. You can have a pit area to go maintain your car. You've got restrooms. You've got snack bars. You can sit there and watch nonstop other cars compete. They both have some pluses to them.
He's right. Yeah, he's right. The one thing that he said was at the track, you have that area to work on your car. So you can line up once your car is ready. One thing on the street is you're very limited on time and the police can show up at any moment. So if you're having problems with your car and you're already on the street, you have two options. Get off the street and go fix your car in a parking lot and come back and hope cops don't show up or see you guys in that moment. Or two, race your car and hope it doesn't break. And that's one thing that at the track you don't have to worry about. There's no pressure of the cops may come at any moment, so you're more calm and collected, focused on your car. On the street, that's always a factor.
I think there's a lot of different personalities that get into racing. So if you take street racing, I think a lot of people that do it, it's all about ego. Big heads, they want everybody to see just how cool they are. Social media's enabled them to do that on an even wider scale. And I think with some of the people, it's almost exactly the opposite. They have zero self-confidence, and so they portray it through their race car and try to make it where they feel more accepted because of what their car does. For me, I don't know that it was ever about me. I think it was always about the car. I think the ability to take a chunk of 3,500 pounds of steel and rubber and chrome and do things to it with your own hands and then go out there and prove whether that was successful or not. I think it was the challenge of that, not the ego part of that drove me.
I can definitely think of a few people that'll fit those descriptions. I'm not going to say any names though, but yeah, I can see what he means.
That again was a fast Jack Beckman. We will find him again in other episodes. As of today, he has 22 career wins, 20 in the funny car section. And, well, Google him, Jack Beckman. I think he clearly highlights that for some people, it's not about the hustle, but it's about the sport. For those people, it's perhaps easier to leave the streets.
Yeah, for someone who's in it for just the sport of racing, for them it'll be a lot easier to transition to the track, since the track would be more for just the racing part. The street tends to be dominated by hustlers, someone that's in it just to make money or a quick buck or just to get that win. They're not out there for, I want to prove my car's faster than his. I want to sit here and hustle him. Let me convince him to give me space and beat him so I can make a quick couple $100.
Let's finish the segment we started before with Big Willie and the 60s in Los Angeles.
The clip starts off with Ben Alameda talking.
In racing, especially in the street or doing it on a legal racetrack, there's really no black, white. Everybody is a brother as far as motorsports are concerned.
Ben Alameda is an engine builder who started in the 80s building engines for street racers and eventually graduated to build engines for people who run on the track.
And we didn't see the difference that I'm Asian or this guy's white or this guy's Mexican American, whatever. None of that really exists. We just love cars and we just end up racing each other.
The video then goes to Big Willie talking from the Brotherhood of Street Racers.
Because, see, the bottom line is that, since you're going to tell a story, let's start off with one important thing about it.
It then goes to show a clip. It says ABC 1965.
Los Angeles, California, the district called Watts. 34 persons die, $40 million worth of property is destroyed, almost 4,000 are arrested. The American Negro, the invisible man, breaks out in a scream, "Look at me, look at me. Know me for what I am. Look at me if you can."
Then it goes back to Big Willie talking.
I returned home in '66, it was a year after the Watts riots. And so the main reason we were organized by the Los Angeles Police Department was because we brought together in the Watts area white, black, brown, and yellow people racing. And so that's when the Los Angeles Police Department got the idea of let's organize this. That makes sense. Racing bring people together and nobody really care what color you are. And so he said, well, this Big Willie. And the reason that I became Big Willie because of the Los Angeles Times.
And I had read the article about Big Willie and the street racers. And I had seen some of the street racer jackets at the street racer lot in Van Nuys. And I knew that Willie was the manager of the Broadway gym in South Central. And so I loaded up and headed down to South Central. And I walked into the Broadway gym and I said, "Hi, I'm Stan. And this is what I did in the Valley. And here's the problem." And Willie said, "I've got the same problem." And we decided that we were going to work together.
And that was it. The general manager of the harbor, he told me over his dead body that I would get Terminal Island. I said, "I'm a Christian and I'm not going to kill you for no racetrack."
And then it shows a clip of the LA Harbor Commissioner at the time speaking.
As far as we are concerned, Big Willie's application for the use of Reeves Field has been denied.
I said, "Mayor Bradley, the general manager of the harbor told me over his dead body, and I told him I'm not going to kill him." And so,
It's now showing an interview with Tom Bradley the mayor of LA from 1973 to 1993?
I think it's a great idea. It provides not only an opportunity to give these youngsters an outlet, but it helps build brotherhood. They are built upon the theme of brotherhood through street racing.
Everybody understand that? Let me hear. Now, what we are trying to produce? All right.
So that was it. That was the beginning of Terminal Island.
There's never a fight. There's never a disagreement. Everybody just gelled together and raced each other, had fun.
I was 16 years old, and somebody said there's a place that people street race out on out by the ocean, and it's illegal. And we said, yeah, right. So they dragged us down there, and sure enough, there was a street sign, there was a starter, and there was a street, literally what looked like a street, and they're racing, and it was the track. And it was the most amazing place I'd ever seen. And people from all walks of life were there. You met General Motor executives as well as gangbangers there. Everybody was there. They all showed up, and people raced all day and all night.
74 all the way to 1995. This is the deal that Mayor Bradley made with the Harbor Department. If you need the property for harbor business, which is fishery, navigation, the basic for Los Angeles Harbor, then Willie will close his track, and then when the land is available, then he'll come back and reopen. So we got to be in the Guinness World Book of Records for the racetrack that's closed and open the most.
That was a track for people. Man, it was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 3 days. They got Honda guys. I mean, the whole world was there. It was a place to be. For that thing to go down like that, who knows how, why? They should never get rid of that track.
There's no money in Brotherhood. Whatever they made was really small, and it really didn't bring back anything to the city, so that was the end of that.
And so there are two people there talking at the end. The last one is Ben Alameda again, and before that is Erwin Queller, who was a street racer who did time in jail for street racing and accidentally killing someone in the 80s. And he's been racing at a track for the last 25 years, 30 years, and goes by the name of Irvindale Queller. Do you think a Terminal Island is a solution for today? Do you think it will work?
I think if they were to reopen the track or Terminal Island, it would cut back a lot on street racing. There will still be people who would want to race on the street only, but for the most part, I think opening it would cut back a lot. At least if they were to, if they're not so strict on the hours of operation. Like, the thing is, a lot of people work, so the time where most people are free is late night. So if you can have a track that's open late night, that track would do good.
Okay, so we got a lot of players there that shifted in their life from street racing to drag racing for various reasons. But the core of the discussion is that there was an alternative to NHRA and street racing. There were probably others, but I know of this one, and that was Terminal Island. To my understanding, it was a road close to the traffic in the harbor area of San Pedro, which is in the southern part of LA at the end of the 110. But that's another and ongoing story, and we will talk about the Big Wheelie, the Brotherhood of Street Racers and Terminal Island another time. Edward?
Well, that will conclude today's episode. This was episode number 2 of Chases a Race, the podcast.
And for episode 3, I promise we will come back to current times. Good morning, Edward.
Good morning, Mr. Tiziano.